Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. My name is Tania and I'm a wildlife filmmaker, and I'm going to be sharing a few tips on how to create your own wildlife documentaries. And first of all, I hope you're all doing well because the photography show has gone online and virtual this year for the first time, which is very exciting, but of course under quite difficult circumstances because of the pandemic. But yeah, I mean, hopefully more of you can actually join and engage with the Q&As as well. So I'm going to try and answer as many of your questions as possible in that session. But also you can, please feel free to drop me a message with any queries you've got as well. But I'm going to try and get as much covered in this session as possible. So I'm going to share my screen and see if I can get going with that first. Brilliant. Okay, I think I'm in now and sharing. Great. In there already. Fantastic. Okay. Okay, so a little intro and brief background of what I do really. I'm a freelance researcher, wildlife filmmaker, and I studied zoology at university. I've always been into natural history, wildlife filmmaking, and it's been a huge passion of mine since I was young, of course, being brought up, growing, watching Attenborough movies and his documentaries as well. And I was also hugely inspired by Sophie Darlington, who's a female, a female DOP and filmmaker, which is very rare. And I do camera assisting and a bit of camera work as well on the side on a freelance basis. And I also, of course, work with Panasonic as one of their Panasonic Lumix ambassadors, which this talk is sponsored by. So I'll be kind of giving you an insight, really, into how you can create your own natural history documentaries on obviously a different scale and budget to some of the programs that I work on for BBC and for Silverback Films, which is the company I'm with currently. And basically using the same sort of techniques and storytelling devices and cinematic visual narrative techniques as well that you can apply to your own movies and short films, because of course quite substantially different budgets, but honestly the actual visuals that you can capture with some of the latest cameras now, especially the new mirrorless ranges, is extraordinary, which hopefully that's what this session can help inform you. And of course shooting for the edit, because that's the most important aspect of production, I would say. So yeah, I think we should dive straight in. Okay, so yeah, as I briefly mentioned earlier, David Attenborough, this great man, I think most of you are very familiar with his work and what he does. But of course, behind the face of this great master of our industry, there are a whole host of incredible people who actually create the productions and documentaries that you see. And Bristol obviously is the base for this. 40% of the world's natural history documentaries are produced and created in this great city. So that's where I'm currently at now, in my house. Well, in my flat rather. And essentially our job and the work that I do is a kind of jack of all trades job, because you get involved in so many different aspects of production, which I'm just going to briefly run through with you now. So pre-production obviously goes on before you actually start filming. There's a lot of preparation that you have to do in order to get yourself and your team in a position to film, essentially. So you obviously have the executive producers, and they're the kind of big head honchos, and they're involved with the commissioning and responsible for delivering what they promised essentially for the series. And they also have a creative role and kind of oversee all of the episodes from pre-production to the final post-production music grade stage. And then you've got the series producers, who are very heavily involved in storytelling and style and direction, and they're like the sort of composers of your perfectly orchestrated production. And it's a really hard job being in control of all the different elements at once, and from the pre-production stage right to post as well. And then you have your producers who work on different episodes as well, and I mean, they essentially get those individuals out through the door, and they're in control of kind of putting the teams together. So they'll have sort of encyclopedic knowledge of tailoring which production crew to do which particular job. So if you're doing a macro shoot or a long lens shoot, they'll have a sort of list of people in their minds as to who would be best suited to that particular role or shoot, of course. And then you've got your assistant producers and researchers as well. Both very similar, but the only difference is really sometimes as an assistant producer, you might have had more experience directing sequences abroad. And then researcher basically kind of does a whole host of jobs, including contacting scientists, coming up with the stories, setting up the shoots, applying for permits, working very closely with your team and your producers as well to make sure that you're on track to actually get those sequences in the bag. And then, of course, you have the management team who are absolute gold dust because they're in control. Your production manager, for example, has control of the budgets and the scheduling, an amazing person who gets all the crews out the door and back safely. Master of all spreadsheets, of course. And basically, they kind of reel in the editorial people when our crazy tech dreams go out of control. And we essentially want to, do too much of that. It's too much spending essentially, which would not be good. So they kind of reel us back in for that. And then, you have a production coordinator who works very closely with yourself as well, booking accommodation and kit. And essentially making sure that everything logistically speaking runs very smoothly. And then you have your production team who are likely to be out on location with you. You've got your sound recordist, your camera person, of course. I say camera person because I'm not segregating any gender. And obviously they're very crucial to the filming. Then you have your field director, which could be yourself. So I will go out in the field with our cinematographer and brackets direct them. No producer directs a camera person really. We kind of offer guidance and obviously have a very strong vision of what the sequence is about. And then you have your fixers as well who have intimate knowledge of the location, sometimes the animal as well. And of course, a presenter if you are a presenter-led series. Then moving on to post-production. So this is where you filmed everything, you've come back from the field and you've got all your hard drives and your rushes with all your footage. And you essentially start creating your story. And you have your editor, of course, who puts the story together on the offline and online edits. And your color grader. So they are the magical people who no one's really familiar with that kind of job role, but essentially they are in control of coming up together with a color palette essentially. So if you're filming very wintry scenes, they might use and color grade very blue tones to kind of create a sense of coldness or temperature, or a melancholy feeling, or if it's a sort of sepia golden tones and hues, you'd color you'd get your grader to kind of give that warm tropical feeling, which it does greatly affect our mood. Color's a huge indicator of what the scene should make you feel like, in addition to music, of course, and narration, etc. Music obviously is a huge one as well because that drives your emotion and helps your audience to understand how they should be feeling as well as the color. And that all comes together with the dubbing mixer who mixes the sound effects as well and what the musician has created. And then, of course, the narrator as well, if he or she has done any narration. And then so that's just a sort of brief overview of what the different job roles are. And, when you're creating your own documentaries, you've got to think of these next few steps really to create your own short film. So I'm just going to run through what I would do for my own productions and when I'm actually working for others as well. So question one and step one always is, what is your story? This is undoubtedly the most important thing you need to consider. And initially, obviously, when you're approaching commissioners, you come up with a treatment. And this is a kind of 2-page summary really of what the whole film is about, and you essentially tell your story in one short paragraph and you indicate what the style and tone is. Is it obs doc, is it feature film, and obviously what is your story. You've got to have a very strong sense of what this is, because quite often people don't actually know, and you don't want to be spending money if you don't have a clear idea of what you want to tell as a story. And sometimes you can also have a short sizzle reel to kind of give the people who are giving the money basically an idea of what you're trying to create. And then storyboards also help as well. Obviously for natural history, you can't get your animal to do or perform and tell them what to do essentially. But if you plan the kind of shot sizes that you want, what kind of angles, what approach, what kind of movement you want to come in from, then that will help your cinematographer enormously. And then think about your characters. Obviously, this is a huge part of any film or storytelling aspect. Think about how you want to introduce them, and you can do this. You want to introduce them memorably, and you can do this by simplifying the setting photographically. For example, when you reduce the depth of field, and you've got that nice shallow depth of field here, as you can see with the cheetah. And you can also do this by showing distinctive markings, so they have a particular tear drop here, or a chipped tooth, or a little notch in their ear that can indicate that this is your character. Then also immerse the audiences into the POV, the field of view of this animal. So are they hunting? Are they stalking something? Can you use a camera to track through the grass to indicate that that's what's happening? Or an animal that's in love, that's sort of stalking its male or female crush. That's a very anthropomorphic way of saying it, but just to give you an idea. And what is their motivation? What's their driving force? And that comes into the question of, what do they want? Of course, all heroes need a quest. What's their journey, the hero's journey? These things you want to think about. Are they hunting? Do they need to find a home? Are they looking for a mate? What is your animal doing, and what's driving them to do that? And of course, your characters can be flawed. You can have a young juvenile who's inexperienced, or an animal that's quite cocky and arrogant, who thinks he can dance or perform better than another. So think about the flaws of your characters as well, because they make them more relatable. And of course, these are all sort of techniques that cinematographers use in feature films as well. And then, what challenges do they face? Do they have any foes? Do they have any predators that want to eat them? Or do they have a massive environmental challenge? Is there a storm approaching? Is there a big fire that's burnt down their home that they've just built? And of course, do they have any rivals that's going to compete with them for a potential mate? And then tie that in nicely with, how does your character change? Do they change for the better? Have they learned from the mistakes? And empathy is something that's hugely important to remind yourself of when you're in the edits as well, and in pre-production, of course, when you're out in the field too. Think about how your audiences are actually going to care about your characters, because if they don't care about them, if they don't care about them dying or being injured, then they're not going to watch to the end of the film. So that's something you can think about. And all of those factors I mentioned before make them more relatable, will make you connect with those characters much more. And I'm just going to stop sharing the screen so that I can show you a video clip, just as an example of some of the Lumix work that I did a couple of years ago. I've done a much more recent project, which I can't tell you about just yet. It's very exciting though, and there'll be some more information about that in the next couple of months. But of course, COVID has put a stop to a lot of our things, really. So I'm just going to show you this quick clip.
Anhนี่ให้ก็หัวหีนี่ก็บ่ได้ซื้อให้เราหมู่เรามาสวนซื้อสร้างเข้ากันเถอะแล้วก็มาเบิ่งสร้างทำไมมันยังสร้างน้อยอยู่สำงามแล้วก็มันเหมาะแดแล้วก็เอาไปเลี้ยงพอก็เฮาได้ไปหาได้มาก็มามัดไว้ก็อาทิตย์หนึ่งเขาอาทิตย์ปล่อยไปใส่สนิท
And yeah, so that was just to give you an example of some of the work that I've done for Panasonic Lumix using their GH5, which obviously was the kind of landmark and a new range of cameras that Panasonic brought out. And it's just revolutionized and changed the way that we can tell stories and who can tell them. Because of course, you know, these cameras are affordable, unlike, you know, other brands which cost tens of thousands of pounds, which obviously, you know, most people can't really afford. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I can send anyone the link if they want to sort of watch that at a later point. And then just to sort of rattle through, pre-production obviously is everything that I get involved with as well. That, you know, we contact scientists to find out what stories we can tell. That's the best way to be able to, you know, find information essentially is contacting the scientists, reading their papers, and seeing what interesting ways you can visually tell these stories of these animals. Of course, the internet's a fantastic resource to be able to, you know, find these papers. And of course, phone bashing as well, because, you know, I think a lot of people are sort of fearful these days, especially. I think I was of that generation that still called people, although hopefully not too old. And yeah, I mean, essentially being able to build up that rapport with your scientist is vitally important, because you've got to be able to obviously make sure that you get the right stories that you can capture, you know, logistically firstly, and also that's going to be interesting to your audiences. And, you know, your scientists are a crucial part of that. And keep asking yourself the question, who, what, where, when, how. So these, you know, the 5 W's, as you say. And, you know, who am I going to get to film this sequence? What is this, you know, what is this animal? What is it doing? Where is it doing this? What time of the year does it do this particular behavior? And how am I going to capture that? So structure-wise, it's important to understand how series work in terms of structure. So if you have a landmark series, you've got 6 episodes, which are each, you know, consistent of an hour. And within each of those episodes, you usually have about 10 to 12 sequences. So they're kind of like mini stories, really. So what you'd be doing if you were doing a sort of 10-minute short film would be the equivalent to a sequence. And that also equates to one shoot. So whenever I go on a shoot, it's basically a 6 to 10-minute sequence that will be used in a episode, and then that episode will feature as part of a bigger you know, series essentially, and they're linked by overarching themes and links. So in terms of fitting the story into your series, the themes can generally consist of, you know, seasons. So you could be doing an episode on winter, an episode on spring, behaviors as well. So it could be hunting or a courtship series. Locations, so it could be, you know, Africa or South America. Habitat-based themes as well, so deserts, jungles, or oceans. And then, of course, challenges as well, finding a mate, leaving home. And then once you've got that step, you've done all your research, you have to actually do the logistics and set this up. So this is where I would be working very closely with my or our production coordinator, and you get the permits in place. So you obviously need permissions to film in national parks. For yourselves, you know, quite often, because if it's not commercial, you won't need permissions, but do ask and do check, you know, resources to make sure that you are legally flying drones, because that can catch you out. Then think about what kind of kit and equipment you're going to be using as well, and tailor your gear essentially to what it is that you want to capture and tell stories about. I mean, that's essentially what filmmaking is all about, really, is using technology and specific bits of equipment and tech that allow you to tell a story. So if you're doing a macro sequence, you use macro lenses. If you're trying to, you know, capture beautiful aerials of an amazing swarm behavior, that's the best tool to use to show that visually. Long lens, gimbal work, time lapses to show the sort of speeding up of time if something moves very slowly, or a phantom flex, or, you know, shoot high speed to be able to slow down the motion. And of course, this is something that, you know, you can shoot high speed, you can do time lapses inbuilt in all of the new S series range of the Lumix cameras. And of course, slow motion as well. You can shoot up to 180 frames a second, 240 frames a second as well, which is amazing to think, you know, considering how small the camera is. And then, of course, think about your crew, who's actually going to film it, and then do your risk assessments as well to make sure that your crew are safe. And a recent shoot, so I showed you a short clip from the last Mahout, which was a short film I did for Lumix in Laos, and it was an amazing experience. You know, Laos is a kind of a forgotten country nestled in between Cambodia, Vietnam, and Thailand. And you know, it was this story, obviously, about this 80-year-old Mahout who absolutely adored his elephant, and they've had this unbreakable bond for over 37 years. And essentially, using the gear that I did, the GH5, with the Zhiyun crane, meant that I could shoot solo. I could, you know, take my drone as well, and a whole host of gear, traveling through the country on my own, and you know, actually create a short film on a budget, but also not compromise on the quality. I mean, that's something that for me really comes out quite strongly, is that I'm able to tell stories with equipment that I can carry in my own backpack. It's extraordinary to think, you know, a couple of years ago, no one could ever dream that you could shoot 4K or 6K on these small mirrorless cameras. It is amazing. And so, yes, here's some of the equipment that I used in conjunction with the GH5. So the Zhiyun crane to kind of get the gimbal and very, you know, to stay, although the GH5 has amazing stabilization, 5-axis, and obviously the new S1H cameras as well have incredible IBIS. So you don't necessarily need it, but for me, I just wanted to kind of use it as a tracking device to really get immersive with my shots. And you can also pair the GH5 or the new S series cameras with the Atmos external recorders as well, to now with the S1H to get raw, which is incredible. You know, it's something you can shoot 5.9K at 30 frames. It's remarkable for the price it's at. And then obviously I use a whole suite of lenses, including the 100 to 400mm and the GH5. One of my favorite lenses is the Summilux lens, the 15mm 1.7 as well. And of course, don't forget about sound. Sound is hugely important when you're trying to do interviews with people as well. So I use the G3s and the Zoom H5 recorder, and I'm all carrying that in my trusty Manfrotto D1 pack. So yeah, I mean, I did a combination of interviews, tracking with the gimbal, close-up details, which I sort of manually focused with, drone shots, and then low light as well with some very fast lenses, such as the 15mm. I could go on all day about what tech specs I used. I can, if anyone's interested in this, I can send them my specific settings that I used. Obviously, it will vary between the different models. This was the GH5 specifically. It varies between the S and then, of course, now the S1H series, which can shoot 5.9K at 30, which is amazing. And, you know, I do shoot mostly off speed, especially for wildlife filmmaking. And a combination of kind of 25 frames, obviously, for, you know, I'm just going to play you a little clip whilst I'm talking. 25 frames for on-speed interviews, and then 60 frames to kind of get just off-speed motion and have that sort of cinematic effect. So if you see this clip here that I'm playing, both of these clips are at 60 frames, just to kind of get that cinematic feel and slow down. I mean, both of, you know, again, it's all about storytelling. I was deliberately slowing down and shooting at this frame rate because they're both, you know, older characters. They're more slow and numbering, and it was kind of a day in the life of these two, you know, V and Maymar, the two characters. So again, think about why you're shooting off speed and slow motion. Don't just be like, right, I'm going to shoot everything off speed. There's a purpose and reason why you do that. And again, yeah, the reason I used the gimbals was to obviously, you can hear that clip, I think, to really get that immersive POV and, you know, movement. When you think about it, we're animals, you know, the way that we see the world isn't static like a tripod. You know, we move through a scene and an environment, and it just immediately creates that more cinematic effect. And again, this was with the Zhiyun and the GH5, and you really can't believe that, you know, well, you can get those kind of cinematic shots at such a small camera, with such a small camera, and for that price, really. These are the types of gimbals that you can use, but essentially, learning Tai Chi and having a strong core do help, because it can get quite tiring after a while. I mean, I'm not professing to be a gimbal expert. My friend here, Jackie Poon, who's an amazing cameraman, is very strong. He's literally like The Rock. And, you know, you have to be incredibly strong to be able to do that. Of course, you have smaller gimbals that you can use. And yeah, I mean, this is the amazing S1H, which I do have here right with me with that very same lens, which you can see is paired with the 100 to 600 mil. It's absolutely incredible and I adore it. And I film a lot of wildlife with it, actually. It's a remarkable piece of equipment. And obviously, you know, you can shoot 5.9K at 60 and 30 frames at 10 bit, which is remarkable for a camera, sorry, at 30 frames, and then Cinema 4K at 60. And shooting in log obviously is a huge benefit in terms of having that latitude to be able to grade, having enough detail in the shadows and the highlights. And obviously the dual native ISO technology, which you see in the VariCam range, is prevalent in this particular model as well. So, you know, shooting in low light, I've done like a recent shoot where I filmed by candlelight and looked amazing. And, you know, it's just got so many cinematic features that, you know, would compete with the top high-end broadcast spec cameras that I use for, you know, big productions and landmark series. And it's L mount, so obviously, you know, these are things that you need to consider. Obviously, so if you look here, you can see the type of sensor. So it's Super 35, but you can also shoot anamorphic, which is fantastic. These are some of the record qualities and codecs that I use for my films. So I have shot in 5K, 16:9, 10 bit. And again, the 10 bit just means that I have enough scope to be able to grade and really pull out those details in the color. This obviously can get quite tacky and data heavy, so I'm just going to sort of skim through these because I can, of course, get back to people if they have any questions about this, but really want to tell you about the storytelling and the whole process about how you get from creating a story and then editing it. And there are two modes essentially for frame rate. You have variable frame rate, you know, that automatically conforms. So when you're shooting, you can see that it plays back in slow motion. That's the setting I particularly use because I like to be able to play back in the field and see what it visually looks like. And then of course you can do the, you know, the high frame rate version where you see it in post and you can, you know, actually slow it down. So if you're shooting at 60 frames, you can slow it down or 50 frames, depending if you're NTSC or PAL. Always shoot manual, always shoot manual when I'm doing wildlife because for wildlife, it's different if you're filming and tracking people. I always use autofocus, but for natural history, always manual. It's the golden rule. And then these are some of the lens choices as well that I've got. So the 150 to 600 mil contemporary lens, which is the lens I showed you previously, is amazing. Again, shooting manual. And then, of course, for gimbals, you have much lightweight lenses. Otherwise, your gimbals will struggle to have that. What I'd love to see with this particular model or in the future, you know, potentially is pre-record, because again, for wildlife, that's imperative. If action's happening, I want to be able to trigger it and record, you know, 4 or 10 seconds previously and be able to cache that footage, because sometimes in natural history animals move so quickly, by the time you've done that you've missed the shot. Inbuilt ND filters would be fantastic as well, and of course, you know, RAW has already been brought out. And of course, let's not forget that these cameras, you know, the GH5, the S1H, the S1R, the S1 can all take incredible stills as well. So I'm just going to skim through a couple of examples here. This is the GH5 with 100 to 400 mil in Lanthan Bore. Beautiful tigress there. This was with the S1H using the 150 to 600 mil and an amazing snow monkey. Again, just looking at those highlights and the details of the fur, absolutely amazing. Crisp as anything. And this was with the S1H, S1R rather, which is dedicated stills camera. And I mean, you can just see how amazingly sharp these images are, and you know, barely any touch up. It's just incredible scope that these cameras give you to be able to take stills and, you know, film high quality cinematic images and videos is remarkable. So then you're out on location and it's time to film. So, you know, this is the most exciting part. You've kind of got through all of your pre-production, you know, who, what, where, when, how. You've got your kit and your logistics sorted, and now you're out filming. And often this is obviously the most exciting part for most people. It can be extraordinarily long hours, but honestly, it's the most rewarding thing when you kind of get come back and you've got all your beautiful images. So this is post-production, where you have all your footage and you're kind of working on all of the other elements to kind of pull together your story. So you'll have your script and your narrator doing all the narration, if you've got that. You'll have your editor pulling together your assembly, your rough cut and your fine cut. And obviously this is a point where we'll log all of the material, and the story is essentially made in the edit. It's a hugely important step in the whole process, essentially. And you know, I mean, I principally use Adobe Premiere. I also use Avid sometimes. I'm sorry if you're a Final Cut Pro fan. And of course DaVinci as well. DaVinci is amazing for color grading too. So coming on to grading, yeah, I mean, obviously Panasonic cameras now give you the ability to shoot Vlog, which is amazing. And of course RAW, if you're using the Atmos V external recorder, which honestly I've tested these and I can give you some examples. It's absolutely incredible. You know, the amount of detail that you have is, again, comparable to some of the higher end VariCam models or other broadcast cameras. And then music, of course, is hugely important as well. I often work with composers very early on in my own personal projects, just because I want to really get a sense and feel of how I'm also going to film certain things in a particular way to be able to really allow the emotion to flow through the sequence. And then you have all of your amazing, you know, films completed now, and you've got to be able to share this with the world. So have a release date, obviously, and then, you know, get people excited about your film on social media. And of course you can have events or enter it into film festivals to try and get as much scope and coverage for your film. And ultimately you kind of ask yourself, why do we tell stories? And for me personally, I've always been hugely passionate about the natural world since I was very, very young. I grew up in Spain originally, and I used to watch all the migratory birds coming through and passing and going onward towards Africa. And it was amazing to think that, you know, millions of years of evolution have passed by, and these animals have been co-evolving and living together for so long, and all sort of led to this diversity and diverse range of behaviors, and obviously landscapes as well across the planet. And for me, being able to work with amazing scientists who are dedicated to the craft and who spend countless decades studying these animals, you know, obviously they're hugely under threat now because of the pressures that we put on the planet. So for me to just share these stories by the, you know, and research by these scientists is a huge privilege. And we do have a big responsibility when it comes to actually, you know, making people pay attention, and politicians as well, because it's the decision makers that have the power to be able to make all the difference in the world. But ultimately it comes from us telling stories, sharing stories, social media, films, and, you know, journalism and media has the huge power, as we've all seen very recently, to make a massive difference to the world. So that's why I tell stories. And yeah, I hope that's been useful. And I'm just going to stop sharing the screen, come back. I hope that's been useful and that it's inspired you to create your own natural history films for yourselves. And yeah, please do feel free to get in touch with me. There will be a Q&A session as well, so ask me anything, literally. And in the meantime, I hope you stay safe.